Members, I ask that we adjourn in memory of Marjorie Perloff. Marjorie Perloff was born Gabriele Minsk in Vienna in September of 1931. When she was 6.5 years old, she looked out the front window of her home and saw as Nazis marched into her hometown. She and her family boarded a train about a week later. Their first stop was Zurich, Switzerland. They went to Belgium, they went to Rotterdam, they ended up in England, and then finally in the United States. When Gabrielle got here, the first thing she did was to change her name to Marjorie, which was common back then for Jewish families. Later, she got married, and her last name became Perloff. She says in her biography, when someone calls me by name, it doesn't feel like they're talking about me. It feels like they're talking about somebody else. Marjorie did something that was very uncommon for women in her generation. She went to college. She got a PhD. She did something that's even more uncommon. She studied poetry, and even more uncommonly, she studied avant-garde poetry. She studied the Dadaists. She studied the Futurists. She studied poets who did everything they possibly could to not be understood, and that was her job, was to explain these very difficult poets and these very difficult poems to the entire world, and she did it with incredible distinction. No one else. She has no peer. She had a tremendous influence on 2-3 generations of scholars and intellectuals and people who love poetry. When I was writing my doctoral dissertation in May of 1999, I was completely stumped. I thought about giving up. And I read a book that she wrote called The Futurist Moment, where she implored all of us to stop thinking about art in terms of movements and to start thinking about art in terms of moments. That what artists do is they react to economics, to society, to psychology, to everything that's happening in these sort of spectral moments that intersect. And that's what they're reacting to. They're not reacting to a fixed ideology or some school that they, supposedly belong to. When I read that, it not only unlocked a lot of doors for me and allowed me to finish my dissertation 6 months later, but it completely changed my view about history, about governments, about relationships, about the entire world. When I became speaker in 2016, I asked my staff to find out if she was still around. I knew she'd be in her 80s if she were. She was not only around, but she was living in Los Angeles. She was living in Pacific Palisades. About a week later, I knocked on her door. I've never been so nervous in my life. I went into her library, and she was there staring at me, trying to figure out what an assembly member was and why a politician would want to waste her time. And so we just did. The only thing we had in common was poetry. We talked about poetry for about 3 hours that day. And I probably visited her 20 or 30 times over the last 7 years, spent 100 hours in that magical back library of hers talking about poetry. It was never comfortable. She was always the professor. She was always, she would ask me who I was reading. I would say Gertrude Stein. She'd say, oh, she's a fine poet. She'd say, what Stein are you reading? I would tell her. She'd say, oh, good, you're reading one of her least challenging works. And then she would give me something tougher to read. I once asked her about the great debate in academia about studying the classics. I said, should we study the classics? Some people say that they're foundational and we have to study the classics. Other people say they're just dead white males. There's no reason to study them. And she said, oh, no, we should not study them. And I said, why? I thought, I said, you must agree with the feminist critique. You must agree with the post-colonial critique. She said, no, that's all garbage too. She said, I don't think we should read the classics because they're not good enough, because they're not beautiful enough. Her entire life was about the pursuit of beauty. And for her, beauty was always linked to the avant-garde. It was always linked to making sure that something that was written was outside the power structure and that something was ultimately different and unique. She was so special in that way. My last lunch with her was scheduled for March 27th. It was on my calendar. I was very excited about it. On March 22nd, 5 days before I found out she had died. That night, I talked about her looking out of her window and seeing Nazis march down the street. I went to that home on New Year's Day, 2019, New Year's morning. You could imagine the state I was in New Year's morning at like 8 a.m., right? I stood out in front of her home, the same home that she grew up as a kid, the same home where she looked out and saw Nazis marching down the street. And remember my wife saying to me, we're gonna have a baby this year. And only thing I said to her was, I hope it's a girl and I hope we name her Vienna. So there was always this link between Marjorie and my daughter. So on the night that I found out she died, I pulled her biography off of my shelf. It was a biography that she gave me. And I laid down next to my daughter, and I read her biography. It took about 4 hours. I read it cover to cover, and I found a quote that I'd read the biography 5 times, and I'd never seen this quote. She said, "To be alive is to be part of the whirlpool. To be alive is to be vaccinated by flames." Marjorie's entire life was about that whirlpool. It was about bringing us into the whirlpool and teaching us that poetry and culture and art is an incredible part of that whirlpool. But she knew a tremendous amount of pain, too. She got on that train and fled Vienna, but she had an uncle who had to walk across 2 mountains, and she had family members who died in concentration camps. And she understood the flames. She understood that the flames impact us in a very real way. And she understood that poetry and that art had to be about everything. It had to be about the pain and the anguish, as well as that beauty that she was always pursuing. So I ask that we adjourn her memory today. Thank you.